Hey everyone, it's Marcus with Film Feature 43, where we talk about movies, media, and myths of the past, present, and the future. Today, I want to talk about a Marvel property called What If, which is based on comics of the same name. The What If series in the comics is based on a character called the Watcher, who is an entity outside of space and time, who can see the main 616 timeline and see parallel dimensions beyond that. And what the comic series is really based on is, what if something else had happened to cause the events to go a different way? If you're a movie fan and if you like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you've seen the Watcher in Guardians of the Galaxy 2, where he is played by Stan Lee, and there's a bunch of entities around him that are also the Watchers. It's a group, and in that scene, if they're kind of setting up, describing why Stan Lee's in every Marvel film. Even in the X-Men and Fantastic Four films that aren't part of the MCU, you can still see Stan Lee. And the reason for that is, and the reason for that cameo, is because they're trying to make it so that there's an explanation that he's watching all these events going on in these parallel universes. You see that in Guardians of the Galaxy 2, and you see his cameos in every Marvel film up until that point. So one thing that's cool about the comics is they can take any event that happened, major or small, and kind of morph it into this idea of, well, since this happened this way, what if it happened in a different way? That's where the Disney Channel Plus TV show, Marvel Studios' What If, is going to kind of draw from the comics and take scenes that we've already seen in the MCU and make them into something different. Like, what if Peggy Carter was Captain America? What if she received the Super Soldier Serum instead of Steve Rogers? Or what if T'Challa was taken by the Ravagers instead of Peter Quill, and he became Star-Lord in space? So that's kind of the stories that they're going to draw from. And it looks like from the commercials and the trailers that they're going to also pull from things like Marvel Zombies, which isn't really a What If series. It's its own separate series. But they're going to pull from the MCU and those in that timeline and say, well, what if this happened? Jeffrey Wright's going to be playing the Watcher in this series. You may know him from the Hunger Games, Catching Fire, and the 2 Mockingjay films. He was the gentleman who won the Hunger Games in the past and was really good with electronics. He was also Felix Leiter in the James Bond films, so you may know him from that as well. Felix Leiter is a character who goes way back in the James Bond canon. He's James Bond's most trusted ally throughout the years, so that's that character, and the actor who played him is going to be playing the Watcher in the upcoming series. That series is going to be coming out mid-2021, and it's going to have a 10-episode run initially. It's going to be animated, so it's not going to be in the traditional MCU style. I'm really looking forward to it, so I wanted to pull out a comic today and kind of give you an overview of that and see how kind of weird and different these comics were from the original comics, and kind of see where we're going with the series once it finally comes out. Today I'm going to talk about what if someone other than Peter Parker was bit by the spider and became Spider-Man. In this comic, they break down 3 people other than Peter Parker getting bit by the spider, and you kind of see how their life changes and how they actually differ from how Peter Parker handled getting spider powers, and how they are all similar in the way that they handle getting spider powers. So the first character we jump into is Flash Thompson. Flash Thompson's the bully. He's always been the bully in the comics. He eventually becomes Venom later in the comics, but in the older comics, he was Peter Parker's bully. You've seen him a couple different iterations in the movies. In the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies, he was the guy who gets into a fist fight with Peter Parker in the hallway. He's the one that gets dunked on by Andrew Garfield in the Amazing Spider-Man films. And he is the high school antagonist of Peter Parker, which is a different kind of take on Flash Thompson. Normally he's the jock, the really aggressive, muscular guy, and in the MCU Spider-Man film, and he's more of the vlogger and like almost cyberbully type. Penis! You say Parker! Penis! Penis! So the first thing we see Flash Thompson do is bring 2 dates to a science unveiling, which is kind of odd. It kind of shows his masculinity that he can get 2 dates and bring them to the unveiling. He pushes Peter Parker out of the way to show that, hey, this guy's the bully, and he gets bit by the spider. As you see with Peter Parker in the Sam Raimi films, he goes to a wrestling match. He doesn't go to actually fight in the wrestling match. He takes his 2 dates, which is a normal thing to do, and he heckles the guy in the ring, and the guy says, come on in and fight me. He goes in, but unlike Spider-Man, who just wins the fight, Flash's ego takes over, and he ends up killing the other wrestler. The police are there, realize the guy's dead, and they try to arrest Flash, and Flash gets away. He puts on a Spider-Man suit that he makes, and he becomes Captain Spider. What's odd about this is he can never take that off, I'm assuming, because then the police would know who he was. The girls knew that they were there with Flash Thompson, so he must be planning on being Captain Spider for the rest of his life. Whenever Flash makes his own costume, he puts a cape on it and even mentions about how awesome his cape is. And as we learn from Edna Mode, knock it! He fights people like the Chameleon, which was Spider-Man's first villain, and then he fights the Vulture, and he loses. He falls and dies, and is miraculously found by Peter Parker, which is kind of weird that he draws into the story again. You see throughout the story he's really jealous. He knows pretty much that Flash was the one that was bitten, so Peter Parker's jealous throughout their whole story. Then the Watcher kind of gives a spiel about this is just one reality, here's a different one. The next person to be bitten is Betty Brant, who was played by Elizabeth Banks in the Sam Raimi films, and Angourie Rice in the MCU Spider-Man film. Here, she's bit, and her and Spider-Man are kind of, they seem like they're dating in this timeline, which they did have romantic relationships in the original timelines. I'm not sure at the time this comic was written if that's what was going on, but they go back to their apartment, and she's able to lift things, and she's super strong, so they hatch a plan that Peter will take pictures of her as Spider-Girl. And the costume is very strange. It's oddly sexualized in the comic book, which comic books tend to have a history of doing that. And Peter follows around and takes pictures kind of like a creep. We see him doing that in some of the movies. He takes Gwen Stacy's picture in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films without her knowing, takes pictures of Mary Jane without her knowing, so I guess Peter Parker can be kind of creepy. And the way the comics have it written out here, he kind of looks creepy, just taking random pictures of her doing random things. J. Jonah Jameson says she's a nuisance, like he does in almost every iteration of Spider-Man. She eventually lets a bad guy go. That bad guy ends up eventually running to the Parker household, where Ben Parker, as we've seen numerous times, gets killed. He can't catch a break, even in parallel universes, and Peter goes into a depressed state, kind of like the Tobey Maguire cry face. Something really weird in this comic is halfway through, whenever Betty Brant is Spider-Girl, her costume changes colors and it becomes this almost like nude color. I don't know if that's a printing issue in the comics or if that's something that was originally done by mistake in the comics, but I wanted to point that out in case you saw that. That's nothing wrong with my camera or anything. That's actually how her costume changes throughout the issue. She tracks down and finds the bad guy and hands him over to the police and quits being Spider-Girl. She throws the uniform into the trash can, as we've seen through many different iterations of Spider-Man as well. The last person we see get bit is John Jameson.
American hero, my son, the astronaut.
He becomes Spider Jameson, which is an extremely odd name, and he has J. Jonah Jameson's approval. He's seen as a hero. He actually has a backpack, and he flies around and uses his powers to actually save people. J. Jonah Jameson actually is the one who made the costume for him. He becomes a astronaut superhero, as J. Jonah Jameson says, and it's very odd.
You serious?
There's a capsule that begins to fall out of the sky, and John Jameson goes to save the people in the capsule. The capsule crashes to the ground and kills him. Peter and J. Jonah go and see him die, and J. Jonah makes a statue, a big bronze statue. Peter starts thinking he was present whenever John got his powers, and he starts thinking about the spider that bit him, and he creates his own formula to become Spider-Man. He drinks it, which is always the smart thing to do, and he becomes Spider-Man in this timeline, and the Watcher reveals that in all 3 timelines he was present when the person got bit. So fate wills Peter Parker to become Spider-Man in all 4 iterations that we see in this comic. So that's the story of what if someone other than Spider-Man got bitten by the radioactive spider. It kind of has different elements of the original Spider-Man mythos attributed to other people, and it gives you a parallel look of what could happen in these certain circumstances. I have a whole collection of what if comics. I plan on talking about a few of them sporadically. There's ones about Captain America. I have more about Spider-Man. That's something I want to talk about, as well as doing other movie reviews. I just figured since Marvel's coming out with What If series that I would put this video out so you guys can kind of get a taste of what stories they may be telling in their TV series. That's my video, everyone. Let me know if you liked it. Leave a like. You can comment down below telling me if you're excited for the new What If series. I can do other What If videos if you want me to. I also plan on doing a remake review where I talk about movies that came out in the past and their remakes. I'm kind of getting out of the realm of the MCU for a couple videos. But if the MCU or Marvel or comics in general or something you would like me to talk more about, just let me know. Alright, thanks.